Okay, hi everybody. This is your instructor Tom, and I am going to give you a quick video feedback on all of your assignments from the first in-camera assignment that I gave you, which I asked you to take an image that is blurry and then an blurry that has motion to it, and then one where the motion is frozen up. So let's get right to the action here. I do want to remind everybody that one of the things that I'm very big on in this class is experiential learning, meaning that we actually do things hands-on and then look at them and figure out by our results what things were successful and what things need refinement or improvement. So with that being said, let us start off with Amanda's image. So here's her first image. It is her blurry shot. You're going to see me do this a lot. I'm going to go into File Info and find out what the settings were that she shot this at. And we can see that she shot it at 1/3 of a second at an f-stop of 7.1, which is really good. That is where we want to be if we're going to be blurring up things. And remember, our rule of thumb here is going to be our shutter setting to freeze things should be 1 over whatever the lens focal length is. So in this case, if we did a 1 over 32, that would be a 1/2 a second. So we know anything below a 1/2 a second is going to freeze up things. And in this instance, she was at 1/3 of a second, which is even longer. So certainly in this instance, we do have a successful image. The one thing I would say here is the dog is blurred so much that I kind of feel like if you didn't tell us it was a dog, we might not know it's a dog. So the blurring is, there's kind of a fine line between where the blur actually adds movement to a photo and then where the photo becomes just totally abstract and we don't know what it is. So maybe in this instance, we could have just tried a couple different slower settings and maybe pick one where we can kind of recognize the dog just a little bit. I'm sure we'll see a couple examples of this as we go along through these images. But generally speaking here, Amanda, good job with this. And then a still shot of the dog. Yeah, the dog is definitely frozen here, but I have to tell you, Amanda, what's going on here is the freezing is a result of the flash, which I ask everybody to not use a flash for their assignments. So if we go in here, we can see your flash fired, and your exposure is at a 60th of a second, which probably would freeze up the dog if it was moving relatively slowly. But this really isn't a good example. Flash is kind of an advanced skill, so just for now, Amanda, I'm going to tell you and tell everybody in the class, please don't use your flash for any of these assignments because it is just going to confuse things a little bit. So here, we just want to focus in on our shutter setting, and honestly, 1/60th of a second, you're kind of at that borderline. You're a little bit frozen, but maybe we could even go a little bit higher, so 1/125th or 1/250th. And we could just correspondingly raise this ISO setting to match that. Okay, so I think you got the idea of it, but just watch out for the flash and you should be fine. Okay, next up we have Kara's images, and looks like Kara's got some sort of a plane, paper airplane going on in this shot. And in the other shot, we've got it flying here. So let's go up to our file info, see if we have some clues here. So 1/80th of a second. So that is a little bit higher than that rule of thumb that I gave you. So theoretically, this should be blurred. But the whole blurring story is not quite that easy. We just can't pin it down to one shutter setting. The faster the subject is moving, the faster that shutter has to be in conjunction with it. So in this instance, the plane's going pretty fast. It looks like your camera is also panning to the left, which is adding movement to it. So between the combination of those two things, you've got a shutter setting that might normally freeze things up, but in this instance, stuff is moving so fast, so it actually does blur successfully here. So really good example of that. I do want to say that if we go in here and look at your image resizing, I think you sized your image too small. Your 4:6 at 300 pixels. I think I asked for 7, a length or whatever the longest side is should be 7. This image looks really, really pixelated to me. So we really want to watch out for that. I'm not sure what happened, what's going on here, but definitely looks pixelated. It almost feels like you may have cropped it and then changed the image size. I don't know. Take a look in your camera data here, see if we have any clues. Don't really see any clues here, so just we got to keep an eye on that and see what we're doing with that. And then here we've got the drone or the airplane, sorry, in the midair, and we look at our file info. You see it, you're at 1/1600th of a second, which, yeah, that is definitely going to freeze up things. So great job on that, and I love how you do capture this kind of in the decisive moment. The one thing I would say here, though, again, you're having some pixelization issues, which tells me you probably resized the photograph wrong. So go back over that resizing tutorial and just give it a once over and make sure that you're doing that right, because this does looks really pixelated, especially in the edges of this airplane there. So good job on your shutter settings. That's what we were most focused in on for this assignment, but definitely we got to figure out what's going on with that pixelization. So take a look at that and see if you can come up with a solution for that. And certainly if you have any questions, shoot me an email or give a shout. Thanks. Okay, next up we have Kayleen's work. And wow, beautiful image. Love the fact that all 3 of these birds are flying right into the camera. I think that is spectacular. I do wonder in the background here if these little spots, they look like they're probably birds, but perhaps it might be worth considering getting rid of them in Photoshop. If you go to your toolbar here and pick the spot healing tool, and then you can just go through here and this upper box, click on that. That's the settings to set the size of it, and then just set it a little bit bigger than the spot and click on it, and you can see those things will automatically heal or go away there. So you can kind of clean up those things if you don't really like them in there. So off to the critical matter at hand, which is our shutter setting. And certainly go to our file info and we look at our shutter, 1/320th of a second. That's fantastic, right where you should be. You know, if the birds were flying across the frame, so from left to right rather than flying into the frame, I would consider maybe moving this up to an even higher number, like 1/1000th of a second. And certainly correspondingly, you would lower this f-stop here. But in this instance, they're flying into the camera. So if you notice when something comes into the camera, it appears to be moving a little bit slower than it actually is. So in this instance, I mean, just a fantastic shot. Really, really beautiful work here. And I think you just totally nailed the right settings for that. So great job on that. And then your blurred image here. I love this little dapple of light in there. And then see, we were talking with Amanda's work how her blurring was so abstract. The blurring here is just enough that we really can see the face of the dog, you know, the eyes and its snout and even its ears here. So we'll go in and certainly looks like you're at a 60th of a second, which again, you know, the dog's moving pretty fast. So proportionally speaking, that is going to blur up. So that does look really good. In this image, I might consider lightening up the dog. This is a little bit of an advanced technique, but I went to my layers, adjustments, and then just clicked on any one of these adjustments here. and then change my blending mode to screen, which is going to lighten this image up. And then I'm going to go onto my toolbar, go to my color palette, make sure black is in the foreground, grab a paintbrush, and this is called a mask here. And essentially with the paintbrush, I'm going to paint the mask off. So we can see that I just removed that brightening of the photo in this area, but left it on the dog, so it makes the dog a little bit brighter. So there's the before, there's the after. This is an advanced technique, and you guys will be exposed to that down the road here in a future module. But for now, I thought this would be a good time to show you. So great work here, Kayleen, and just keep up at it. You are doing a fantastic job with these settings so far. So keep up the good work. And next up, we have Latrell's work. And just a quick glance at this image, I'm pretty sure that if we go into File Info, we are going to see, oh, well, I guess we don't see it there, but I am going to say that our shutter setting here is at least 1,000th of a second. I'm going to pause this a second and take a look see if you gave me your exposure settings here. So hold on. Okay, so I had a chance to look at your artist statement, and you didn't let me know what your shutter setting here was, but you know, we can see these individual droplets here. I'm predicting that this was probably 1/1000th of a second, and certainly an excellent example of freezing up motion. And then just that same exact subject with a slower shutter setting, again, looks to me like our camera data for some reason is not in there. I think sometimes when we work in Windows, stuff gets stripped. It looks like you were working in Windows Photo Editor. That's a no-no. We should be working in Photoshop. So that perhaps is one of the reasons our data is not carrying through here. So just be aware of that. You're going to have exercises here that you do have to use Photoshop specifically for that. So great job with your settings. You know, I imagine this one's probably a 15th of a second, something like that. And awesome shot. But just everybody make sure that you are using Photoshop rather than other photo editing tools. And next up we have Bryant. And love this. Boy, talk about a decisive moment. You know, the frisbee is just right above the dog's mouth here, and the dog is kind of in midair. Beautiful, beautiful example of using that frozen motion to sort of, you know, freeze forever in time, that moment that really takes place in a split second. So love this image. Great example of what I'm looking for out of this assignment. And I'm sure if we go in and look at our info, which of course we don't see that in there again, but I'm gonna guess again that we're probably somewhere around 1/1000th of a second on this image. So great work with that. And then your blurred image, we've got some rolling dice. Again, this is one of those instances that maybe the shutter setting is almost too slow, in that it's tough to tell that these are dice. You know, without the titling, if we were just to look at this image, we might not know those are dice. So it is kind of helpful to have the title of the photo up here. I suspect that this one probably has got the information stripped too. Yeah, it didn't. So I'm not sure whether you're using some other software besides Photoshop, but other than that, this is great. I mean, you know, whatever your shutter setting is, whether it's 15th of a second or, you know, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe try one stop faster. In other words, if it's a 30th of a second, go to maybe a 60th of a second and see if that still gives you the blurring effect, but it's just a little bit more recognizable as a dice. But again, fantastic job here. Exactly what I'm looking for out of this assignment. So well done. And next up we have Erica's image. Another really, really good example of a decisive moment. You know, it's captured sort of right in mid-flight where both of her feet are off the ground and she's kind of at the pinnacle of her jump. If I was to have any like sort of very, very minor critique here, just would be I'd love to see sort of those extra bit of hands be captured in the frame rather than going off the edge. But gosh, that's a super, super, super minor point. If we look at our settings here and our file info, there you go, perfectly, 1/1000th of a second. And that freezes that up perfectly. So great job on this one. And then the subway train here, we've got, this is a really good example of what I'm talking about. It's blurring, but it still has enough sharpness to it that we can tell exactly what it is. It's not just like this big white streak. We can actually tell that it's a train, but there is a little bit of blurring in the headlights and the top of the train. So that is a really nice example of slow shutter, and we see 1/15th of a second, which again is exactly what I'm looking for out of this assignment. So great work with this. Really, really nice job. And you really have a handle on finessing that slow shutter, especially here. So I like that. So great work. And then next up we have Armin's work. And again, we've got this beautiful frozen droplets going on at the bottom of the waterfall here. And if we go to file info, there you go, starting to see a pattern, hopefully 1/1000th of a second again, and that's frozen up really beautifully. So fantastic job on that. As we move in even a little bit more, it becomes sort of more abstract and more interesting. So really wonderful image, like that a lot. So the second image, your blurred image. So if we go to file info, you're at 1/90th of a second, which is probably going to blur a biker a little bit. But what's going on here is that your camera autofocus did not lock onto the subject yet. So there's two kinds of blur. There's just like simple lens out of focus blur, and then there's motion blur. And usually with the motion blur, as you probably noticed throughout all these images that I showed, that motion blur kind of has almost like a streaking look to it. This just looks like it's kind of soft, almost like we're kind of viewing it underwater or something like that. And that is really the effect of the lens not autofocusing or not locking on correctly to this. So when you do take a picture of something moving, make sure the lens and the camera lock onto the subject and have them in focus before you actually end up then fully releasing that shutter there. The shutter button sort of has a half release, and when you push it down to the halfway point, that gives you an opportunity to then autofocus, and then once it autofocuses and locks on, you can complete the pressing of the button by pushing it all the way down, and then your shutter will be released and the image will be taken. So I think that's what's going on here rather than you having motion blur. So just keep an eye on that. Shutter setting was probably where it needed to be for a shutter blur, but this is definitely a blur that is just a plain old out of focus image, which isn't always a bad thing, but in this instance it's not really what we were looking for the assignment. So take a look back through the video and look at some of those other blurs that worked really well in there, and I think you'll get a good idea of what I'm looking for. All right, look forward to seeing your next assignment. And then last but not least, we have Shane's work. So Shane, first image here, we go into our shutter settings, see what we got here. And again, I have no information out of you. So again, sometimes I think that data gets stripped if we're using some of the third-party photo manipulation tools. So just make sure that you're using Photoshop here. So if we look at this image, we've got the tire swing here, and the tire swing is definitely blurring, probably at somewhere around 1/30th of a second. Yeah, again, we don't have that information embedded in there, but I think this is exactly what we're looking for, sort of that spinning, that feeling of the tire is actually moving. And what I really like, especially about this image, is, the sand below it is frozen and pretty sharp, but just that thing moving, which is a tire here, is the thing that's frozen up. So really good job on that. This one is a little bit tougher. I am seeing a little bit of blurring down here, so I suspect your shutter setting is not as high or as fast as I need it to be here. So just want you to pay attention to that and make sure that you are using a shutter setting. If you saw a couple of those other frozen water shots were up around 1/1000th of a second, and that's pretty much where you need to be with that. This, unfortunately, is a little bit soft and a little bit blurry. Probably a better example of a blurred photo than a frozen one. So keep an eye on that, and if you have any questions, let me know. Okay, everyone, that will wrap up our first video feedback. If you do have any questions, let me know. Certainly, we're at the point where we're still starting to experiment and learn about our cameras. So the only way to master this is to keep practicing it and keeping a really good record of your settings and trying to correspond those settings to what the look or the final photo looks like, whether you're freezing it or blurring it here. It's a fundamental skill in photography. You got to master it to be successful in this class. So keep up the good work for those of you that got it, and for those of you that need some refinements, certainly let me know if there is anything I can do to help. So with that, good luck on your next assignment, and I'll see you in a couple days with another video.